"Excuse me, sir. I need to check how much money I have in my account, please." A little black boy stood there at the big fancy counter. He was only 10 years old, wearing beat-up sneakers with holes in the bottom and shoelaces all torn up. His jacket was way too big for him, probably came from some charity shop. You could tell his family didn't have much money. The bank manager stopped what he was doing and looked this poor child up and down real slow, like he was some kind of bug. Then he just started laughing out loud. Not a nice laugh, but a mean one that made everyone in the whole bank turn around and stare. "Check your account?" the man said, his nasty voice bouncing off all those shiny marble walls. "Kid, this is First National Heritage Bank, not some welfare office for street kids like you." The little boy's name was Wesley, and he just stood there holding a crumpled-up piece of paper in his small hands. His grandmother had given it to him before she died, and he knew it was important. But this grown man in his expensive suit was treating him like he was nothing, like he didn't belong there with all those rich people in their fancy clothes. Wesley's heart was beating so fast, and his face felt hot with shame. But he remembered what his grandmother always told him. "Baby, you hold your head up high, no matter what anyone says to you. You're worth just as much as anybody else in this world." See, so Wesley took a deep breath and stepped closer to that marble counter, even though his legs felt shaky. He held up the wrinkled paper his grandmother had left him. "Please, sir," he said in his quiet voice. "My grandmother told me I have money here. She wrote it all down for me before she went to heaven." Bradley Whitmore, that was the bank manager's name. He just rolled his eyes and made this loud snorting sound that made other people in the bank turn around to look. "Oh, this is rich," Bradley said, talking loud enough so everyone could hear him. "The kid's got a piece of paper from Grandma. What's next? A note from Santa Claus?" Some of the other customers started whispering to each other, and a few of them were actually smiling, like this was all some kind of joke. Wesley felt his cheeks burning hot, but he kept standing there because his grandmother had made him promise to be brave. Chelsea Morrison, one of the bank tellers, came over to see what all the fuss was about. She had blonde hair, all done up fancy, and lipstick that was probably more expensive than Wesley's whole outfit. "What seems to be the problem here?" she asked. But she was looking at Wesley like he was some kind of bug that had crawled in from outside. "This young man," Bradley said, saying those words like they tasted bad in his mouth, "claims he has an account with us. Can you believe that?" Chelsea looked Wesley up and down, taking in those worn-out sneakers with the holes in them, his jacket that was way too big, and his jeans that had patches on the knees. "Honey," she said, in this fake sweet voice, "are you sure you're in the right place? Maybe your mommy meant the check-cashing place down on 5th Street? Wesley's hands were shaking now, but he held that paper tighter. "My grandmother said Eleanor Brooks. That's her name. She said I have money here that she saved up for me." Bradley's face got all twisted up mean. "Eleanor Brooks? Kid, do you have any idea how many Eleanor Brooks there might be in this city? You think you can just walk in here with some random name and we're supposed to hand over money?" "But she gave me this paper," Wesley started to say. "That paper could say anything," Bradley interrupted. "For all we know, you picked it up off the street somewhere. Or maybe you wrote it yourself." The way he said it made it sound like Wesley was some kind of criminal, and that hurt worse than anything. Wesley had never stolen anything in his whole life. His grandmother had taught him better than that. Jerome Davis, the security guard, started walking over. He was a big black man in a uniform that looked all official, but when Wesley looked at him hoping for help, Jerome just looked away like he didn't want to get involved. "You want me to escort the young man out?" Jerome asked Bradley, but his voice sounded uncomfortable, like he didn't really want to do it. "Not just yet," Bradley said with this mean smile. "I'm curious to see how far this little game goes." Wesley felt trapped now. Like all these grown-ups were closing in around him. The bank felt so big and cold, with all that white marble and those high ceilings that made every sound echo. He thought about running, but his grandmother's voice kept whispering in his head about being brave. "Sir," Wesley said, trying to keep his voice steady, "could you just check the computer? Please?" My grandmother said Eleanor Brooks, and she said there would be money for when I need it. Bradley leaned way down so his face was close to Wesley's, and Wesley could smell his cologne and see the mean look in his eyes. "Listen here, kid. I've been working at this bank for 15 years. I know every single important client we have, and I'm telling you right now, no grandmother of yours has any money here. You understand me?" His voice was getting louder, and more people were stopping to stare. Wesley saw this lady in a fur coat shaking her head like she was disgusted, and a man in an expensive suit was filming with his phone, like this was all some kind of entertainment. "Maybe we should call social services," Chelsea whispered to Bradley, but not quiet enough that Wesley couldn't hear. "Kid's obviously got no supervision, probably lives in one of those shelters downtown." Wesley's heart felt like it was breaking into pieces. These people were talking about him like he wasn't even there, like he was nothing but a problem they needed to get rid of. "I don't live in a shelter," he said, his voice getting smaller. "I live with my uncle now. He's at work, but he knows I came here. My grandmother told me about this place before she died, and she said—" "Oh, now there's an uncle too," Bradley said, laughing that mean laugh again. "Kid, your story keeps changing. First it's grandma with the money. Now there's some uncle who lets you wander around the city by yourself. What kind of family lets a 10-year-old walk into banks alone?" That question hit Wesley right in the chest because he couldn't really explain it without telling them everything. About how his Uncle Lawrence was always working so hard to take care of them both, and how Wesley had wanted to surprise him by checking on Grandma's money, and how he'd snuck out while Uncle Lawrence was on one of his important phone calls. He's busy," Wesley said quietly. "He works really hard." "I bet he does," Chelsea said with this nasty tone. "Probably works so hard he doesn't even know where you are right now." Bradley was enjoying this now, Wesley could tell. He was standing up straighter, talking louder, making sure everyone in the bank could hear every word. "You know what I think?" Bradley said. "I think this is all made up. Some story you heard somewhere, maybe from other kids on the street. You thought you could walk in here and convince us to give you money with some sob story about your poor dead grandmother." Wesley felt tears starting to burn in his eyes, but he blinked them back hard. He wouldn't cry in front of these people. His grandmother had always said crying was okay, but not when people were being mean on purpose. "It's not made up," Wesley said, his voice shaking. "She was real, and she loved me. And she saved money for me because she wanted me to go to college someday." "College?" Bradley practically shouted, and several people actually laughed out loud. "Kid, look at yourself. Look at those shoes, that jacket. You really think someone like you is college material?" The words hit Wesley like a punch. Someone like you. He'd heard those words before, from teachers who didn't think he was smart enough, from kids at school who made fun of where he lived, from store clerks who followed him around like he was going to steal something. But his grandmother had never said those words. She'd told him he was brilliant, that he could be anything he wanted to be, that the only thing that mattered was what was inside his heart and his head. "My grandmother said I was smart," Wesley whispered. "Your grandmother probably told you a lot of things," Bradley said. "Doesn't make them true." Diane Campbell, the lady in the fur coat, finally spoke up. "Excuse me, but is this really necessary? The child seems genuinely upset." Bradley turned to her with this smooth, professional smile that was completely different from how he'd been treating Wesley. "Mrs. Campbell, I appreciate your concern, but we have strict policies about fraudulent claims. We can't just hand out money to every person who walks in here with a story." But he's just a child. Which makes it even worse, Bradley said. Someone's obviously put him up to this. Street kids are used for scams like this all the time. They send in the cute ones to tug at heartstrings. Wesley felt like the floor was falling out from under him. Now this man was saying that not only was he lying, but that someone had made him lie, like he was part of some criminal gang or something. "I'm not a street kid," Wesley said, his voice getting desperate. "My uncle takes care of me. We live in an apartment, and I go to school, and I get good grades, and my grandmother was a teacher, and she saved money for me, and I just want to see if it's really there, like she said." Bradley crossed his arms and looked down at Wesley like he was something dirty. "Prove it," he said. "What?" "Prove any of it. Where's your uncle right now? What's his name? Where does he work? What school do you go to? And don't just give me some made-up answers." Wesley's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. How could he explain that Uncle Lawrence worked for some big company that Wesley couldn't even pronounce? How could he prove that he lived in a nice apartment when he was standing there looking like he'd gotten his clothes from the donation bin at church? "That's what I thought," Bradley said with satisfaction. "Jerome, I think we've entertained this charade long enough." The security guard took a step closer, and Wesley could see the conflict in his face. Jerome looked like he didn't want to do this, but he also looked like he was afraid to stand up to his boss. "Come on, son," Jerome said quietly. "Time to go." "But I haven't done anything wrong," Wesley said, his voice cracking. "I just wanted to check on my grandmother's money. She said it would be here for me when I needed it." "And when exactly did this grandmother of yours set up this alleged account?" Bradley asked, with fake politeness. "What year? What month? Who was the banker who helped her?" Wesley stared at him, feeling completely lost. His grandmother had never told him those kinds of details. She'd just held his hand and told him that if anything ever happened to her, he should remember that she'd saved every penny she could for his future. I don't know," Wesley admitted. "Of course you don't," Bradley said triumphantly, "because none of this is real. Jerome, escort our young friend here to the door, and make sure he understands he's not welcome back." As Jerome reached for his arm, Wesley pulled away. "Wait," he said desperately. "Can't you just check? Just type in Eleanor Brooks and see if there's anything? Please?" Bradley's face went cold. "I've been more than patient with you, child, but I will not waste one more second of my time or my staff's time on this ridiculous fantasy. You need to leave now, before I decide to call the police about attempted fraud." The word fraud hit the bank lobby like a bomb. Everyone was staring now, and Wesley could hear people whispering about the little scammer and the con artist. A woman was pulling her purse closer to her body like she thought Wesley might try to grab it. Wesley felt completely alone in that huge marble room full of people who all thought he was a liar and a criminal. His grandmother's paper was crumpled and damp from his sweating hands, and his sneakers felt even more worn out under all those judging eyes. But then, something inside him got angry instead of scared. His grandmother had been the best person he'd ever known. She'd worked 2 jobs to take care of him and still found time to help him with his homework every night. She'd gone without new clothes and fancy food so she could save money for his future. And this man, in his expensive suit, was calling her memory a lie. "My grandmother was real," Wesley said, his voice stronger now. "And she was good, and she loved me, and whatever she saved for me is in this bank somewhere. You can call me a liar and throw me out, but that doesn't change what's true." Bradley's face turned red. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a 10-year-old kid in second-hand clothes. "That's it," he snapped. "Jerome, remove this child immediately. And if he tries to come back, we're calling the police." Just as Jerome was reaching for Wesley's arm again, the bank's main door opened, and several people in expensive-looking suits walked in. Wesley didn't pay much attention at first. The bank was always full of important-looking people, but then he heard a voice that made his heart stop. "Wesley! Wesley! What in God's name are you doing here?" Wesley spun around, and there was Uncle Lawrence striding across the marble floor with a look on his face that Wesley had never seen before. It wasn't angry exactly, but it was intense and focused in a way that made the whole room feel different. Behind Uncle Lawrence was a woman Wesley didn't recognize, a black woman in a power suit with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She was scanning the scene, taking in Wesley's terrified face, Jerome's uncomfortable posture, and Bradley's defensive stance. "Uncle Lawrence," Wesley said, and his voice came out small and shaky. "I was just trying to check on Grandma's money like she told me about. But they said—" Lawrence Brooks reached his nephew and knelt down, putting his hands on Wesley's shoulders and looking him directly in the eyes. "Are you hurt? Did anyone hurt you?" "No, sir. But they said I was lying about Grandma, and they said I was trying to steal money, and they were going to call the police." Lawrence's jaw tightened, and when he stood up and turned toward Bradley, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The woman in the power suit stepped forward, and her voice cut through the marble lobby like a blade. "I'm Patricia Edwards, Regional Director for First National Heritage Bank. Someone want to explain to me exactly what's been happening here?" Bradley's face drained of color as recognition dawned. The regional director's presence meant only one thing: corporate oversight. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words emerged. "Ms. Edwards, His voice cracked. "There's been a misunderstanding." Patricia's steel-gray eyes swept the lobby, taking in Wesley huddled in the corner, the scattered documents on the floor, the crowd of customers frozen in uncomfortable silence. Her gaze lingered on Jerome, whose security uniform seemed to shrink under her scrutiny. "A misunderstanding?" Her voice carried the authority of 20 years climbing corporate ladders. "From what I observed walking in, it looked like a 10-year-old child being publicly humiliated in our lobby." Lawrence stepped closer to Bradley, his presence filling the space between them like a gathering storm. "Mr. Whitmore, isn't it? I believe you and I need to have a conversation." The name tag on Bradley's chest might as well have been a target. His hands trembled as he straightened his tie, a nervous gesture that fooled no one. "Sir, if you could just—" "No." Lawrence's voice cut through the attempted deflection. "You've done enough talking. Now you're going to listen." Patricia pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "Security footage from the last 30 minutes. Chelsea, I need those surveillance files sent to my tablet immediately." Chelsea Morrison, who had been trying to blend into the teller windows like wallpaper, jumped at hearing her name. "Miss Edwards, I was just following—" "Following what? Bank policy?" Patricia's eyebrows rose. "Since when is our policy to mock children and refuse basic account services based on appearance?" The marble lobby had become an amphitheater of shame. Customers who had laughed minutes earlier now studied their phones with sudden intensity. The elderly woman in pearls shifted uncomfortably, her designer purse clutched tighter against her chest. Wesley remained in his corner, grandmother's letter still clutched in his small hands. The worn paper had absorbed his tears, smudging some of Eleanor's careful handwriting, but her words remained clear. "You are worthy of every dream, every opportunity, every kindness this world has to offer." The child presented proper documentation, Lawrence continued, his voice steady but lethal. "He followed every protocol your institution requires, and your response was to turn him into a spectacle for your entertainment." Bradley's face flushed red, then pale again. "He's just a kid from the street. I mean, look at him. Those shoes, that jacket. Those shoes," Patricia interrupted, checking her tablet as surveillance footage loaded, "belong to a customer of this bank. A customer with proper identification and legitimate business." The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Jerome shifted his weight from foot to foot, the radio on his belt crackling with distant chatter from other security calls throughout the building. His dark skin glistened with perspiration, despite the lobby's air conditioning. Jerome. Patricia's voice carried across the marble expanse. You were here for this entire incident? The security guard's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Years of keeping his head down, following orders, staying invisible, crashed against this moment of reckoning. Yes, ma'am. And you did what exactly? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jerome's uniform had given him authority, but authority without courage was just costume jewelry. His eyes met Wesley's across the lobby, and something cracked inside his chest. I didn't do nothing, just watched. Patricia's fingers paused on her tablet. You watched a child being humiliated and did nothing? Ma'am, Jerome's voice broke. 20 years of security work, of being the responsible one, the one who followed rules and kept order. But what order was there in cruelty? Lawrence turned back to Bradley, whose arrogance had evaporated like morning mist. You want to know who that boy is? That's my nephew, Wesley Brooks. The name hit Bradley like a physical blow. Brooks. The same Brooks, whose investment portfolio represented 30% of the bank's high-value accounts. The same Brooks whose quarterly meetings with senior management were marked on calendars weeks in advance. Your nephew? Bradley's voice came out as a whisper. Eleanor Brooks's grandson. Lawrence's words fell like hammer blows. The woman who cleaned offices in this very building for 15 years. The woman who saved every penny she earned and invested it through this bank. The woman who died last month and left everything to her grandson. The revelation rippled through the lobby like an earthquake. Customers who had witnessed the humiliation now stared at Wesley with new understanding. The boy they had dismissed, laughed at, ignored. He was one of them. More than one of them. Patricia's tablet chimed with an incoming message. Her expression darkened as she read. Account balance verified. She looked up at Bradley, who seemed to be shrinking inside his expensive suit. $87,412. The number echoed in the marble space like a gunshot. Wesley's head lifted slightly. Grandmother's savings. Every double shift, every missed meal, every worn-out uniform. All of it adding up to this moment of vindication that she would never see. Bradley's legs seemed to give out. He grabbed the edge of the teller counter for support, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled with sweat. 87,000? His voice cracked on the numbers. $87,000 that a 10-year-old boy tried to access through proper channels. Patricia continued, her voice gaining momentum like a prosecutor presenting evidence. $87,000 that represents a working woman's entire life savings. $87,000 that you decided wasn't worth basic human dignity. The elderly woman in pearls suddenly found her voice. Dear God, we just stood here and... Her words trailed off, but the guilt in her voice filled the spaces between marble columns. Chelsea Morrison stepped forward, her teller window feeling like a prison. Ms. Edwards, I tried to tell Mr. Whitmore that the documentation looked legitimate. Looked legitimate? Lawrence's voice cut through her excuse, like broken glass. It was legitimate. There was never any question about legitimacy. The only question was whether you would treat a black child with the same respect you'd show a white one. The accusation landed in the lobby like a grenade. The careful dance around race, the polite fiction that this was about anything else, shattered completely. Bradley's mouth moved soundlessly. His career, his reputation, his carefully constructed life, all of it crumbling like sand castles at high tide. I didn't. I wasn't. But the words rang hollow even to his own ears. Patricia scrolled through more surveillance footage, her expression growing harder with each frame. Customer arriving with documentation. Customer being questioned. Customer being mocked. Customer being threatened with removal. She looked up from the tablet, her gaze boring into Bradley like a drill. At what point in your training did we teach you that humiliation was part of our customer service protocol? Bradley's hands fluttered helplessly at his sides. 20 years of banking, of working his way up from teller to manager, of building what he thought was an unshakable position. But foundations built on prejudice had always been quicksand. Ms. Edwards, please, I can explain. Explain what? Explain how you turned our lobby into a circus? Explain how you violated every policy we have regarding customer dignity? Explain how you exposed this bank to liability that could cost us millions? The word millions hit Bradley like a physical blow. His mind raced through possible legal consequences, discrimination suits, corporate investigations, everything he had built, everything he had worked for, dissolving like sugar in rain. Wesley stood up from his corner, grandmother's letter still in his hands. His worn sneakers made soft sounds against the marble as he walked toward the group of adults whose world he had inadvertently destroyed. "Excuse me," he said quietly. The entire lobby turned toward his voice. The same voice that had been mocked, dismissed, laughed at. Now it commanded attention like a symphony conductor raising his baton. "I just wanted to check my account balance," Wesley continued, his young voice carrying a dignity that shamed every adult in the room. "My grandmother told me to always be polite when doing business. She said banks were important places where people kept their dreams safe." Bradley's face crumpled. Dreams. Safe. Words that turned his behavior into something monstrous. Patricia knelt down to Wesley's eye level, her corporate armor softening for just a moment. "She was right, and I'm sorry that we failed to keep your dreams safe today." Wesley nodded solemnly. "She also told me that sometimes people make mistakes because they're scared or hurt inside. She said forgiveness was stronger than anger." The lobby had become a cathedral of shame and redemption. Bradley sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with the weight of realization. Jerome stepped forward, removing his security cap. "Ma'am? Miss Edwards? I'd like to resign my position." Patricia looked up at him. "Jerome? No, ma'am. I took an oath to protect people in this building. Today I failed that oath. I don't deserve to wear this uniform." The admission hung in the air like incense, heavy with regret and the possibility of redemption. Lawrence watched his nephew navigate this moment with a grace that humbled everyone present. Eleanor's teaching lived on in the boy's voice, her wisdom flowering in his capacity for forgiveness. But forgiveness didn't mean freedom from consequences. "Mr. Whitmore," Patricia said, standing back up and facing the broken manager, "you're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. HR will contact you regarding your final paperwork." Bradley's head snapped up. "Terminated? But I've been here for 8 years. I have a mortgage, a family. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy a child's dignity for your own amusement." The words landed with finality. Bradley's career at First National Heritage Bank was over, ended in the same marble lobby where he had wielded his petty authority like a weapon. As security guards appeared to escort Bradley out, he looked one last time at Wesley. The boy who had walked in seeking nothing more than an account balance had exposed the rot at the heart of an institution, the casual cruelty that had festered in marble corridors and mahogany offices. "I'm sorry," Bradley whispered, as they led him toward the doors. But sorry was a word without weight when spoken too late. The lobby slowly emptied of customers, their business suddenly completed, with urgent efficiency. Only Wesley, Lawrence, Patricia, and a few staff members remained in the echoing space. Patricia turned to Wesley with something approaching reverence. "Young man, I want to personally ensure that you never experience anything like this again. Not here, not anywhere we have influence." Wesley nodded, then looked up at his uncle. "Can we go see grandmother now? I want to tell her that her money is safe, that her dreams are safe." Lawrence's throat tightened. Eleanor was gone, but her legacy lived on in the boy who could transform a moment of cruelty into an opportunity for grace. The marble lobby of First National Heritage Bank would never be the same. In the space where a child had been humiliated, institutional change had been born. Where laughter had echoed at suffering, new policies would ensure dignity for all. And somewhere beyond the reach of marble and brass, Eleanor Brooks smiled, knowing that her grandson had honored both her savings and her teachings with equal grace. The aftermath settled over the bank like dust after an earthquake. Patricia Edwards remained in the center of the lobby, her presence commanding absolute attention as the tremors of institutional reckoning continued to spread through every corner of First National Heritage Bank. Bradley Whitmore stood frozen near the customer service desk, his face drained of all color. The weight of his catastrophic error pressed down on him like a physical force. His hands shook as he processed the magnitude of what had just transpired. The boy he had humiliated, mocked, and nearly had arrested was the nephew of Lawrence Brooks, the bank's most powerful client, the man whose investments kept their doors open, whose influence could reshape their entire operation with a single phone call. "Mr. Whitmore," Patricia's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Your employment with First National Heritage Bank is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, and your access credentials have been revoked." The words hit Bradley like physical blows. 20 years of banking experience, his reputation, his salary, his standing in the community, all of it crumbling in the space of minutes. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to plead or excuse or explain, but no words came. What defense could there be for what everyone had witnessed? Jerome Davis, the security guard who had been prepared to remove Wesley from the premises, now stood with shoulders hunched in shame. His own participation in the humiliation burned in his chest like acid. He had been ready to lay hands on a child based solely on Bradley's prejudiced assumptions, ready to become another instrument of institutional discrimination without questioning the righteousness of his actions. Chelsea Morrison, the teller who had giggled at Wesley's request, pressed herself against the wall as if trying to disappear entirely. The memory of her laughter felt like poison in her throat now. She had participated in the mockery of a grieving child, had added her voice to the chorus of cruelty simply because everyone else was doing it. Wesley remained close to his uncle's side, still processing the emotional whiplash of the past hour. The transformation from victim to vindicated had happened so quickly that his young mind struggled to absorb it all. The worn sneakers on his feet suddenly felt different, not symbols of poverty to be ashamed of, but badges of authenticity his grandmother had taught him to wear with pride. Lawrence's hand rested protectively on Wesley's shoulder as he watched Patricia Edwards dismantle the culture of discrimination that had wounded his nephew. There was satisfaction in witnessing justice served, but the deeper ache remained. Eleanor would never know that her careful savings had grown into such substantial wealth. She would never see Wesley's vindication or witness the institutional changes her legacy would spark. "Mrs. Morrison," Patricia continued, her tone brooking no argument, "your participation in this incident demonstrates a fundamental lack of professional judgment and basic human decency. You are suspended pending a full review of your conduct. Your supervisor will contact you regarding your employment status within 48 hours." Chelsea's face crumpled, but she managed only a weak nod before hurrying toward the exit. her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor that had witnessed her shame. Patricia turned her attention to Jerome, whose massive frame seemed to have shrunk under the weight of his complicity. "Mr. Davis, your willingness to physically remove a child from this bank without proper justification or verification represents a serious breach of our security protocols and our values. You will report to Human Resources first thing Monday morning for mandatory retraining and sensitivity education. Consider this your only warning." Jerome nodded slowly, his voice barely audible when he spoke. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." He paused, then looked directly at Wesley, his eyes filled with genuine remorse. "Young man, I owe you an apology. What almost happened here because of my actions. It was wrong. I should have asked questions instead of making assumptions." Wesley looked up at his uncle, who gave an encouraging nod. The boy's voice was steady when he replied, "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Davis. My grandmother always said that good people sometimes make bad choices, but what matters is learning from them." The wisdom in Wesley's words struck Jerome like a revelation. Here was a child who had been victimized showing more grace and understanding than many adults ever managed. The security guard's resolve to become a better man crystallized in that moment. Diane Campbell, the wealthy customer who had remained silent during Wesley's humiliation, approached slowly. Her designer handbag clutched tightly in her manicured hands. She addressed Patricia directly. "Ms. Edwards, I want you to know that I witnessed everything that happened here today. If you need statements or testimony for any proceedings, I am prepared to provide them." She turned to Wesley, her voice thick with emotion. "Young man, I should have spoken up when Mr. Whitmore was treating you so cruelly. My silence made me complicit in your suffering, and I am deeply sorry for that." Lawrence nodded respectfully to Mrs. Campbell. "Thank you for your integrity in coming forward now. It takes courage to acknowledge our failures." The remaining bank employees gathered at a respectful distance, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock, shame, and uncertainty about their own roles in the toxic culture that had been exposed. Patricia addressed them directly, her voice carrying throughout the lobby. "Let me be absolutely clear to everyone present," she announced. "What happened here today represents everything this institution will no longer tolerate. Discrimination based on race, economic status, age, or any other factor is not merely against our policies, it is morally reprehensible and will result in immediate termination." She gestured toward Wesley, who stood with quiet dignity beside his uncle. "This young man came to our bank as a legitimate customer seeking basic service. Instead, he was subjected to humiliation, mockery, and threats. The fact that he happens to be related to one of our most important clients is irrelevant. Every person who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with respect and professionalism." The weight of institutional change hung heavy in the air. Patricia continued, "Effective immediately, all staff will undergo comprehensive diversity and inclusion training. New protocols will be implemented to ensure that customer service standards are applied equally regardless of appearance or perceived economic status. Regular audits will monitor our compliance with these standards." Bradley, who had been standing in stunned silence, finally found his voice. "Please," he whispered, his professional veneer completely shattered. "I have a family, a mortgage. I made a terrible mistake. Surely there's some way to—" Lawrence turned to face the man who had humiliated his nephew, his expression stern but not cruel. "Mr. Whitmore, you didn't make a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. What you did was deliberate, calculated, and designed to cause maximum humiliation to a grieving child. You showed no mercy, offered no dignity, and created a spectacle of cruelty that everyone here will remember." The truth of those words settled over Bradley like a shroud. He had indeed been deliberate in his actions, had taken pleasure in asserting his perceived superiority over someone he deemed powerless to fight back. The realization that his own prejudice and cruelty had destroyed everything he had worked to build was almost too much to bear. Wesley looked up at his uncle, then stepped slightly forward. His young voice carried clearly through the lobby. "Mr. Whitmore, you hurt me today. You made me feel small and worthless when I was already sad about my grandmother. But she taught me that holding on to anger hurts us more than the people who hurt us. I hope you learn to be kinder to other people, especially children, who can't fight back." The grace in Wesley's words struck everyone present with profound impact. Here was a 10-year-old boy, still processing his grief and the trauma of public humiliation, offering forgiveness to the man who had wounded him. Bradley's face twisted with a mixture of shame and something that might have been the beginning of genuine remorse. Thank you," Bradley managed, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I promise you that I will remember this day for the rest of my life. I will try to become the kind of person who deserves it." Patricia Edwards watched the exchange with professional satisfaction, tinged with personal admiration. In her 25 years in banking, she had never witnessed such a powerful demonstration of the institutional changes that were so desperately needed throughout the industry. "Mr. Brooks," she addressed Lawrence directly, "I want to personally assure you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated and that the systemic issues it has exposed will be comprehensively addressed. First National Heritage Bank is committed to earning back not only your confidence, but the confidence of every customer we serve." Lawrence nodded slowly. "I appreciate that commitment, Patricia. But understand that this isn't just about my personal satisfaction or even about our business relationship. This is about ensuring that no other child ever experiences what Wesley went through today." He looked around the lobby, taking in the faces of employees and customers who had witnessed the transformation of institutional culture in real time. Eleanor Brooks, Wesley's grandmother, spent her entire life fighting for dignity and respect for every student in her classroom. She saved every penny she could so that Wesley would have opportunities she never had. Today, her legacy demands that we extend that same dignity to everyone who walks through these doors. Wesley felt a warm surge of pride as his uncle honored his grandmother's memory. Eleanor's teachings about treating all people with respect had been more than just words. They had been a way of life that continued to guide and protect him even after her death. Patricia turned to address the remaining staff members directly. "I want everyone to understand that the changes we're implementing aren't temporary measures designed to smooth over this incident. This is a fundamental transformation of how we operate as an institution. Your job security and advancement opportunities will depend on your commitment to these new standards." She paused, allowing the weight of that reality to settle over them. Those who cannot or will not embrace these changes should begin looking for employment elsewhere. Those who are committed to building a better, more inclusive institution will find opportunities for growth and development. The message was clear. The old culture of casual discrimination and prejudice was ending, replaced by accountability and genuine respect for all customers. Some employees nodded with apparent relief, perhaps having been uncomfortable with previous practices but unsure how to challenge them. Others looked uncertain, their own prejudices and assumptions suddenly exposed as career-limiting liabilities. Jerome Davis stepped forward again, his voice stronger now. "Ms. Edwards, I want to volunteer for any additional training or education programs you implement. What happened here today opened my eyes to things I never wanted to see about myself. I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. That kind of self-reflection and commitment to growth is exactly what we need moving forward." Wesley tugged gently on his uncle's jacket. Lawrence bent down to hear his nephew's whispered question. The boy's concern was touching in its simplicity. He wanted to make sure that the bank employees who were being disciplined wouldn't lose their ability to feed their own families. Lawrence straightened, his throat tight with emotion at Wesley's compassion. Even after everything he had endured, the boy's first concern was for others' well-being. Eleanor had indeed raised an extraordinary child. "Patricia," Lawrence said, "Wesley wants to know about the families of the employees who are facing consequences. He's concerned about their welfare." The profound maturity and kindness in Wesley's question struck Patricia forcefully. Here was a child showing more consideration for his tormentors than they had shown for him. It was a powerful reminder of the moral courage they were all being challenged to demonstrate. "Wesley," Patricia addressed him directly, "your concern for others shows the kind of person your grandmother raised you to be. We will ensure that all disciplinary actions are accompanied by appropriate support and resources for affected employees and their families. Our goal is accountability, not cruelty." The lobby had become something unprecedented, a space where institutional change was happening in real time, witnessed by customers and employees alike. The marble walls that had echoed with cruelty now resonated with commitment to justice and dignity. Lawrence checked his watch and realized that nearly 2 hours had passed since he had first received Wesley's terrified phone call. The transformation that had occurred in that time felt almost surreal in its completeness. A culture of discrimination had been exposed and dismantled, careers had been ended and others redirected, and institutional policies had been fundamentally reformed. But perhaps most importantly, Wesley had witnessed the power of truth and justice to overcome prejudice and cruelty. Eleanor's teachings about dignity and respect had been validated in the most public and powerful way possible. "Wesley," Lawrence said gently, "are you ready to go home?" The boy nodded, but then looked around the lobby one more time. The worn sneakers that had been objects of ridicule now seemed to anchor him to his grandmother's values and his own authentic identity. He had learned that dignity came not from external validation, but from internal strength and character. As they prepared to leave, Patricia handed Lawrence her business card, along with additional contact information for the bank's customer service executives. "Mr. Brooks, please know that you and Wesley can contact me directly with any concerns or issues in the future. This bank is committed to earning and maintaining your trust." She turned to Wesley one final time. "Young man, you have shown more grace and wisdom today than many adults demonstrate in their entire lives. Your grandmother would be very proud of the person you are becoming." Wesley's eyes brightened at the mention of Eleanor's pride. That approval, even imagined, meant more to him than any amount of money or public vindication. As they walked toward the exit, the marble lobby that had witnessed such dramatic change seemed different somehow. The cold grandeur remained, but it no longer felt oppressive or exclusionary. It had been transformed from a symbol of institutional barriers into a testament to the power of accountability and change. Outside, the afternoon sun felt warm on Wesley's face. The traumatic morning seemed like something from another lifetime, though the emotional impact would take time to fully process. Lawrence placed a protective arm around his nephew's shoulders as they walked toward the car. "Uncle Lawrence," Wesley said quietly, "do you think Grandma Eleanor knows what happened today?" Lawrence paused, considering his response carefully. "I think your grandmother's love and teachings are what got us through today, Wesley. Her legacy is alive in you, in the way you handled yourself with such dignity and grace. In that way, she's always with us." The boy nodded thoughtfully. Eleanor's presence had indeed felt tangible throughout the ordeal, guiding him through his responses and reminding him of the values that mattered most. The account balance and financial security were gifts from her savings, but the strength and character were gifts from her love. As they drove away from First National Heritage Bank, neither of them looked back at the institution that had been fundamentally transformed by their presence. The real victory wasn't in the public vindication or the disciplinary actions taken against those who had wronged Wesley. The true triumph was in the knowledge that Eleanor's legacy would continue to protect and guide other children who might find themselves vulnerable to prejudice and discrimination. The worn sneakers that had started the day as symbols of poverty and shame had become badges of authentic dignity. Wesley would continue wearing them, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Reminders of where he came from and the values that would always guide where he was going. The marble lobby of First National Heritage Bank settled into its new reality, forever changed by a 10-year-old boy in worn sneakers who had transformed a moment of institutional cruelty into a catalyst for systemic justice. 8 years had passed since that transformative day at First National Heritage Bank, and Wesley Brooks stood in the mirror of his Georgetown University dormitory, adjusting the collar of his graduation cap. At 18, he had grown tall and confident, his shoulders broad with the quiet strength that comes from weathering storms and emerging intact. His academic achievements spoke for themselves: summa cum laude in economics with a minor in social justice, acceptance to Harvard Law School already secured for the fall. But it was his feet that told the real story. The same worn sneakers from that day 8 years ago still adorned them, though now they were carefully maintained museum pieces of his journey rather than symbols of necessity. The cracked leather had been lovingly preserved, the frayed laces replaced with identical ones he had searched months to find. They were his armor, his reminder, his connection to the woman who had shaped his character before the world had tested it. The scholarship fund established in Eleanor Brooks's name had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had begun as Lawrence's gesture of honor for his mother had evolved into a comprehensive educational foundation supporting over 200 students annually. The fund specifically targeted children from low-income families who demonstrated both academic excellence and the kind of character that Eleanor had embodied throughout her teaching career. Wesley served on the scholarship selection committee now, his unique perspective invaluable in identifying which young applicants possessed genuine resilience versus mere hardship credentials. He looked for the same quality in their essays that his grandmother had nurtured in him: the ability to maintain dignity in the face of indignity, to find strength in vulnerability, to transform pain into purpose. Lawrence had mellowed in the intervening years, his protective fury giving way to thoughtful philanthropy. The hostile takeover of First National Heritage Bank had been swift and comprehensive. Within 6 months of the incident, the institution had been restructured from top to bottom. Patricia Edwards had been promoted to CEO, implementing training programs that became industry standards for inclusive banking practices. The transformation was so complete that business schools now studied the case as an example of how corporate social responsibility could be both morally imperative and financially profitable. The ripple effects had extended far beyond banking. Lawrence had quietly used his influence to support legislation addressing discrimination in financial services, his testimony before congressional committees carrying weight precisely because he spoke from personal experience rather than theoretical concern. He had become an unexpected advocate for systemic change, his business connections opening doors that traditional activists could never access. Bradley Whitmore's descent had been as swift as it was irreversible. The video footage of his treatment of Wesley, combined with Patricia Edwards' documentation of his pattern of discriminatory behavior, had made him unemployable in any customer-facing financial position. He had attempted to reinvent himself in various fields, but his reputation preceded him in the interconnected world of professional networks. The last anyone had heard, he was working nights at a warehouse outside the city, his marriage having dissolved 2 years after his termination, his children maintaining minimal contact, The irony was not lost on those who remembered the incident. A man who had mocked a child for his humble circumstances had been reduced to circumstances far more humble than those he had once scorned. Yet Wesley felt no satisfaction in Bradley's downfall. His grandmother had taught him that taking pleasure in another's suffering diminished one's own character, regardless of how deserved that suffering might be. Jerome Davis had undergone perhaps the most surprising transformation of anyone involved. The security guard's moment of moral awakening that day had sparked a complete reevaluation of his role and responsibilities. He had enrolled in night school, studying social work, and eventually became a youth counselor specializing in helping at-risk teenagers navigate institutional prejudice. He and Wesley maintained a correspondence, Jerome often seeking advice on how to recognize and nurture the kind of inner strength that Wesley had demonstrated. Chelsea Morrison had quietly left banking altogether, using her savings to open a small nonprofit credit union that specifically served low-income communities. Her work remained largely unrecognized outside her neighborhood, but the families she helped understood the value of what she provided. Her transformation had been internal rather than public, a private reckoning that led to practical service. Diane Campbell, the wealthy customer who had witnessed Wesley's humiliation in silence, had become one of the Eleanor Brooks Foundation's largest individual donors. Her guilt over her inaction that day had evolved into sustained commitment to ensuring other children would not face similar treatment without advocates. She funded legal clinics that provided free representation for discrimination cases. Her own moment of cowardice transformed into decades of quiet courage. As Wesley prepared to leave for his graduation ceremony, he pulled out the letter his grandmother had written him, its edges now soft with handling. The words remained as powerful as the day Lawrence had first read them aloud. Character is not built in moments of comfort, but in moments of challenge. When the world treats you as less than you are, remember that their blindness does not change your worth. He had carried these words through every difficult moment of the past 8 years, through the curious stares when his story became local news, through the weight of being seen as a symbol rather than simply a student, through the pressure to constantly prove that his success was legitimate rather than the result of special treatment. The truth was more complex than either his critics or supporters understood. Yes, doors had opened for him because of his uncle's connections and the publicity surrounding his case. But walking through those doors, excelling once inside, and maintaining his character throughout the journey, those achievements belonged to him alone, built on the foundation his grandmother had provided. Georgetown University's graduation ceremony took place on a perfect spring day, the cherry blossoms providing a backdrop of renewal and beauty. Wesley's academic honors were announced to applause that felt both celebratory and respectful. But it was the moment afterward, when Lawrence wrapped him in a fierce hug, that meant the most. "She would be so proud," Lawrence whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." Wesley nodded, feeling Eleanor's presence as strongly as if she stood beside them. The boy who had walked into First National Heritage Bank 8 years ago had been seeking only to access his inheritance. He was leaving Georgetown having inherited something far more valuable: the unshakable knowledge that dignity was an internal possession no external force could touch. That evening, at the celebration dinner Lawrence had arranged, Wesley made a brief speech that surprised everyone with its focus. Rather than talking about his academic achievements or future plans, he spoke about the transformation he had witnessed in all the people touched by that day's events. 8 years ago, a moment of cruelty was transformed into an opportunity for growth, not just for me, but for everyone involved. Some people changed because they were forced to confront the consequences of their prejudice. Others changed because they recognized their own capacity for both cowardice and courage. But the most important lesson I learned wasn't about discrimination or justice or even dignity. It was about redemption, the possibility that exists in every moment for people to choose who they want to be going forward. The applause was subdued but heartfelt. These were people who had watched Wesley mature from a traumatized child into a thoughtful young man, and they recognized the wisdom in his words. Later that night, alone in his childhood room at Lawrence's house, Wesley sat on the bed where he had once grieved his grandmother's passing. The worn sneakers sat beside him, no longer daily footwear but cherished artifacts of his journey. Tomorrow he would begin the next phase of his life. Law school, then presumably a career fighting the kind of institutional prejudice he had experienced firsthand. But tonight was for reflection and gratitude. He thought about all the people whose lives had been altered by that single day, the concentric circles of change that had spread outward from one moment of choosing dignity over despair. Bradley Whitmore's children were growing up with a father who had learned, perhaps too late, about the cost of prejudice. Jerome Davis was helping other young people find their strength. Chelsea Morrison was providing financial services with humanity and respect. Even Patricia Edwards, who had been the instrument of justice that day, had been changed by the experience. Her leadership of the Reformed Bank had become a model for the entire industry. Her commitment to inclusive practices influencing policy at the federal level. She often credited Wesley's composure during that traumatic morning as her inspiration for ensuring that no other child would face similar treatment at any institution under her authority. The scholarship recipients of the Eleanor Brooks Foundation were perhaps the most tangible evidence of transformation. Over 200 young people had received educational opportunities they might never have accessed otherwise. Some were now teachers themselves, others doctors, engineers, social workers. Each carried forward the values Eleanor had embodied, the belief that education combined with character could overcome any obstacle. Wesley opened his laptop and began typing a letter to the newest class of scholarship recipients. It had become his tradition to write to them before they started their freshman year, sharing not advice, but perspective. You are not representatives of your circumstances, but authors of your character. The challenges you have faced have prepared you not to overcome the world, but to improve it. Carry yourselves with dignity, not because you have something to prove, but because dignity is your birthright, regardless of what anyone else may think or say. He paused, thinking about the boy he had been 8 years ago, walking into that bank with nothing but hope and his grandmother's letter. That boy had sought only to claim what was rightfully his. This young man understood that the greatest inheritance had been the values Eleanor had instilled long before her death, the unshakable foundation that no amount of external judgment could erode. The worn sneakers caught the lamplight as Wesley finished his letter. Tomorrow, he would pack them carefully for the move to Cambridge, where they would sit in his Harvard dormitory as reminders of the journey that had brought him there. They would be present at his law school graduation, at his first day as an attorney, at every significant milestone in his future. But they were more than personal talismans now. They had become symbols of transformation itself, proof that dignity could flourish in the most unlikely circumstances, that character could transform not just individuals, but entire institutions, that one grandmother's love could ripple outward to change the lives of hundreds of people she would never meet. Outside his window, the city settled into peaceful nighttime rhythms. Somewhere in that urban landscape, other children were facing their own moments of testing. Some would have advocates, others would stand alone. But because of what had happened 8 years ago, because of the changes that single day had set in motion, more of them would encounter justice than would have before. Wesley turned off the lamp and settled into sleep, the worn sneakers standing guard beside his bed, like faithful sentinels. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to honor his grandmother's memory, and extend her legacy of dignity and service. But tonight was for rest and gratitude, for the deep satisfaction that comes from understanding that pain transformed by character becomes a gift to the world. The marble lobby of First National Heritage Bank had returned to its quiet efficiency, but it was forever changed. Training programs, policy reforms, and cultural shifts had transformed it from a bastion of exclusion into a model of inclusion. The bronze plaque, near the main entrance, installed the year after Wesley's incident, bore a simple inscription, "In honor of Eleanor Brooks, educator and advocate, whose legacy reminds us that dignity belongs to every person who enters these doors." 8 years had passed, but the transformation continued, radiating outward through every life touched by that day's events. Wesley Brooks had claimed more than his inheritance that morning. He had claimed his place in a story larger than himself, a story that would continue long after his own chapters were complete. His grandmother's love had found its perfect expression, not in the money she had saved, but in the character she had cultivated, the character that had transformed one moment of cruelty into decades of justice, compassion, and hope.